Hi, this is Chris Melly. I'm an editor at the New York Times on the breaking news desk, which we call the Express team. Your professor, John Roche, has asked me to talk about topics that are near and dear to my heart, and that is about prosecuting the story and being right and then being first. Um, so I'm just going to jump right in here. Just a quick background about me. I've been a newsman for 36 years. I grew up in the Bronx, worked in newspapers in upstate New York, and joined the New York Times 6 years ago on the copy desk, and then the Express team about 4 years ago. And I run the desk on the weekends. Um, so that's kind of my quick and dirty by way of introduction. And I will also just before I forget, if you ever need to reach me, let's see, no, there we go. That's a good way to reach me, and I promise you, you will never find a more janky, homegrown video than this. I feel like I'm in some kind of hostage video. I should probably hold up some kind of proof of life, like the daily newspaper or something. Anyway, so let's talk about first. Let's talk about being right and then being first. And I have got some prepared remarks, so I'm going to work off of those. Um, so I think it's actually going to be fun to jump into this with a discussion of accuracy and getting it right by quoting former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld. He said, quote, "We know there are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know." End quote. So when we're reporting on something, we're often faced with the question of how do we know that? How do we as reporters know that, and how do the people we're talking to, how do they know that? It's a fundamental question that needs to serve as the underpinning of all our reporting, from breaking news to features to investigative reporting, magazine writing, more complicated stories, even news briefs. It all has to be the underpinning to what we do. And it's a question of how do we know that can reveal the soft underbelly of assumptions, rumors, innuendos, half truths, or fuzzy sourcing. Among the things that keep me awake at night is when we don't embrace our own ignorance. So I think one of the mantras of reporting is to say, I don't know. I don't know that. Let me find out. I really don't know. Don't be afraid to tell your editor, I'm not sure. Let me find out. As an editor, I get very squeamish when I hear reporters say, well, I'm pretty sure, or I think, I suppose. It's like, no, you've got to know. And how do you know this? Um, so sometimes it's difficult for us to embrace that cognitive dissonance, that ignorance, that weird feeling we feel like, because we want to be instant experts, we want to know about this stuff, we want to be able to show off to our bosses or to the public, but we need to step back from that and be prepared to say, well, we're not sure. So I'm going to quote Ronald Reagan, who I think actually used to quote some other Russian philosopher, but he used to say about nuclear disarmament talks, trust but verify. And that's, I think, has to be one of the things you think about is like, you could talk to the source and they may be believable, but you have to sort of test and prod a little bit to make sure that they actually know what they know. So I mean, it's an ego stroke to be an expert on a topic, right? And it also happens to be a dangerous place for us to inhabit. So I come back to the question, how do we know? And it can be sometimes uncomfortable to ask, right? Because it sounds accusatory. I'm saying, well, how do you know? And it sounds like, well, you don't know what you're talking about, or you botched it. But you have to take it. You can't take that personally. You have to be professional about it, and to be able to peel back your ego and step back and say, you know what, I'm not really sure. I thought 2 + 2 = 4, but maybe I don't have the math right, or maybe there's another number in here somewhere. Um, so much like a surgeon who counts all the instruments in the operating room before and after an operation to make sure none were mistakenly left in the patient, raising the question is a simple safeguard to protect you against what could be a grievous error. So let's talk about sourcing. Let's talk about vetting sources who would look to deliberately mislead us, and some who just unconsciously, mistakenly mislead us because they don't know better. There are hucksters out there, to be certain, and especially in this day and age, there are people who are going out of their way to fool the media. And I'll talk about one example. This is way before social media and really before the internet was much in ascension. Um, at a newspaper I worked at, there was some place, a garbage dump called the Al Turi landfill. Believe it or not, this was a garbage dump named after a guy, and it was a hotbed of mob activity and illegal dumping and toxic dumping and mafia involvement. A whole really nasty place. Anyway, there started to be these letters to the editor that spoke up in support of this garbage dump, and they were signed by friends of the Al Turi landfill. Now, I covered this area, and it was a curiosity. Now, I wasn't the editorial page editor, but I couldn't help but noticing these letters. Anyway, make a long story short, about 13 of these letters showed up over the course of a year, and they got through because we, as an institution, the newspaper, didn't question them closely enough. And it turned out that these were the invention of a local internet publication called The Invader. And these guys they were doing it for satire. They were doing it to prank us. And they got over on us pretty good. There's other examples that abound during Hurricane or Superstorm Sandy. If you look up a Twitter account called Comfortably Smug and Superstorm Sandy, you'll see that this person had been tweeting false reports about how Con Ed was shutting down the power grid in lower Manhattan and how the stock exchange was closed because of flooding, all kinds of erroneous reports just because he could. And some media outlets bit on what he said without ever vetting him to find out what he knew, how he knew it, where he was, anything like that. In fact, I'll recommend a piece that appeared in The Atlantic by Alexis Madrigal, who did a whole great takeout about Superstorm Sandy and fake photos. So take a look at that. Another quick case in point, I once covered a Catholic high school, and there was a janitor strike. And we were a local newspaper, so we covered this sort of stuff. And I went to talk to, after school, and I found some kids in the parking lot. I'm like, so tell me what's going on with the strike? What's it like? And what are the conditions like in the classroom? And this one kid was really a loudmouth, and he was like, oh, the bathrooms are just they're filthy and they're disgusting, and the classrooms haven't been cleaned, and blah, 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 blah. And he was hanging out with these other students. So I quoted the loudmouth, of course, because, he was great for quotes. And next day after the story appeared in the paper, I got a phone call from the principal, and guess what? It turned out this kid was no longer a student. He had, in fact, been a student, but was expelled for being a troublemaker. And I got duped. I got hosed. I never asked him, for student ID. I made the leap of faith that because he was hanging out with these other students, who in fact were bona fide students, that he himself was one. And, he certainly manipulated me and lied to me in some regard, but I probably should have pressed him harder for, how do you know? Are you a student here? Well, if he had lied to me, there would have been much I could have done, in terms of answering that question directly, but he sort of dodged the question, and maybe looked pretty stupid. Um, Unfortunately, local news is not alone in these kinds of mistakes. 2012, there was just a banner year for reportorial missteps where we did not vet information or reacted too quickly. If you go back, you'll see when the U.S. Supreme Court ruled on Obamacare, CNN reported it incorrectly the first time. They flubbed it. There was a radio station that had sent out an email that said President Bush, the first Bush, HW, had died, when in fact he had not. There were the early erroneous reports about the Penn State football coach, Joe Paterno, having died. Again, another example you can look up. And then if you think about the Newtown school massacre, that was just a cornucopia of bad reporting early on. There was reports of a second shooter, that Lanza's mother was shot and killed at the school, that she taught at the school, that there was another victim in Hoboken, New Jersey. Wrong, 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 wrong. All of them absolutely incorrect. But in the haste of the moment, there was this rush to report stuff that was unverified and unconfirmed. So, again, how do we know? One of the things I will tell you is that almost universally in the opening minutes of a breaking news story, a major breaking news story, almost all the initial reports will be somehow distorted or wrong. People's adrenaline is flowing. Eyewitness accounts can't necessarily be the most reliable. I mean, you can tell something is going on, but if somebody's telling you for sure a body count, take it with a grain of salt. Make sure you get it verified first from the authorities, who themselves can sometimes get it incorrect. We have definitely seen this on all kinds of scales, both big and small. Jack Schaefer, who was a Reuters columnist who covered the press and politics, wrote a column in which he was quoting Dan Rather, and Dan Rather said, "It's inevitable that some first reports will be wrong," and that's what Dan Rather was telling viewers on September 11th, 2001, and how insightful and how prophetic that turned out to be, because Rather and other TV colleagues reported on that day that a car bomb had exploded outside the State Department. A United Airlines flight had crashed into the vicinity of or at Camp David, and that the FBI had arrested two people in a truck with explosives near New York's George Washington Bridge, all, of course, which we know were not correct. Those were all erroneous reports. But you got to take a breath, slow down, ask, how do we know that? Before you hit send, before you publish, verify, corroborate. Is this from a named source? Is this from somebody who's in authority? Is this somebody who actually was there? Is it somebody who really knows what the hell they're talking about? Is this some anonymous screwball on Twitter? Speed kills. Speed kills. So, I mean, I've always wanted to be the first to be, with the scoop. And so I will tell you that it's taken me some discipline and, time and attention to get to the place to say, hold on a minute, are we sure about this? And let's also be honest with the readers about what we don't know. So something to consider: the greater the magnitude and the scope of the story, the breaking news story, the more confusing and the more blurry the picture is likely to be, because you're going to have a stampede of media, you're going to have crowds, you're going to have a ton of first responders, each which is going to have its own jurisdiction, each with conflicting accounts, each with different body counts. I mean, even look at these wildfires in California. We've seen ourselves, the numbers are all over the place sometimes. And in fact, there was one body that they accounted for because they found a skeleton. And then it turned out that skeleton was an anatomical skeleton for medical school that they found in the ashes, and they thought was the remains of a body. And then they had to say, oh no, that one didn't count. So I mean, there's things that can just go haywire. Going back to Schaefer from Reuters, he was saying that, quote, the source of much of the bad Newtown information the press retailed to the public was the police. Anyone who's ever covered crime will tell you that the police can be just as confused in the early going at a crime scene as anybody. But now, end quote. And the critical thing here is, if the authorities revise a figure or they say, oh, no, we got this wrong, you just have to be clear to the viewers and to your readers to say, the authorities said X, Y, Z the first time. They have now revised their story to say A, B, and C. Now, could you have perhaps anticipated they would have gotten that wrong? Well, not always. I mean, you think the authorities know, but sometimes, they're human. They screw it up. But if you yourself are reporting it incorrectly, you have to make sure you own that and, make it clear to readers. A previous version of the story, an earlier version of the story said X, Y, and Z, and correct the record. So seek named sources. Don't see, people are speaking to you off the record or as anonymous sources. That should be a red flag. Your spidey senses should tingle and make you wonder, why does this person want to speak off the record? Get named sources. Seek corroboration. 2, 3, 4 sources. Are they all on the same page, or are they just simply echoing each other? I mean, are they independently telling you information from each other, or are they just simply sharing the same rumor 2 and 3 times? I mean, you have to sort of ask again, how do you know this? And they say, well, I heard it from Joe, and you've already talked to Joe. Well, then that second corroboration doesn't count because he's just repeating the same thing that you've already heard. This is one that's tough, and that is embrace the uncertainty. Be prepared to be in this weird space where you don't really know. You kind of you want to be out ahead. You want to be ahead of the competitors. You want to be in the know. But honestly, people are going to remember longer if you screw it up than if you were like the third or fourth with the news alert. People will find you and they'll come to you if you are accurate, if you're consistent, if you are, have integrity about your reporting. But if you screw it up, believe me, they will remember that a lot longer. Don't rule out egos. Egos, both your own and those of the sources who are talking to you, because they want to have an inflated sense of themselves. So, trust your spidey senses. If your little voice in your head tells you something seems amiss, if something doesn't quite pass the smell test, if your bullshit detector is going off, pay attention to that. Never discount what your inner voice is warning you about, because I'll tell you that anytime I have disregarded that, it has always, always, always come back to bite me in the ass and make me wonder, why didn't I listen to myself in the first place? Take a step back, ask them, where have you gotten this information from? Did you see documents? Did you talk to somebody? Can I talk to that person? Make sure they know about this, this information firsthand. Um, I'm old enough to remember that in March of 1981, when Ronald Reagan there was an attempted assassination. Uh, there was ABC news anchor guy named Frank Reynolds, and they were getting reports on the air that his press secretary, James Brady, who was a close friend of Reynolds, had been shot and killed. Now, it's true that he was shot, but he did not die. He, in fact, survived. But then Reynolds learned that that information was incorrect, and he just had like a meltdown on the air. If you can find this video, he's visibly upset, and he just screams into the camera, well, sort of off camera to a producer, "Let's get it nailed down. Somebody, let's find out. Let's get it straight so we can report this thing accurately." And it was just this outburst, but it was something that really stuck with me because he was expressing this frustration of like how they got out ahead of their skis without verifying the information. One other thing I will recommend is look up the Sago, West Virginia mine disaster, SAGO. It is a textbook example of how the media got that wrong. It was a game of telephone. It's more than I can get into here, but do look it up. There's a Neiman blog by a guy named Frank Langfitt, Langfitt, that I would recommend you look up, and it gives a real terrific blow by blow of how things got tremendously bollocksed up. It's an insightful story. It also says a lot about human nature. So, get name sources, slow down, ask yourself, does this make sense? Does this pass the gut check? Can you verify or debunk what this person has said? Can you get multiple sources to verify this information? Don't follow the pack. Just because ABC, CBS, your competitor has got the news alert does not mean that you necessarily have to hit the button. Find out for yourself. Don't say, well, they must have it right, because you can't assume that they necessarily do. Um, Ted Koppel, former ABC news anchor, said once, quote, "If we are moving into an era in which reporters are pressured to get it online before we have a chance to check and edit the material, if speed is the main criterion of putting something online, then I think that's dangerous. Ultimately, a journalist has a responsibility to separate truth from rumor," end quote. And I think that's really, he sort of puts his finger on things. It's a messy business in the best of circumstances, and even in non-deadline stories, there's ways that we can screw things up. So what I'm saying is, touch touch the brakes. Don't necessarily hit the accelerator all the time. Be explicit in your questions. Where was this person? Where were you exactly? Slow down the interview. Don't rush through it just because you want to, be really precise in your questions and be precise in the answers that you seek. Um, and along those lines, I want to talk a little bit now about prosecuting the story. And that is, okay, so you now have the story in front of you. You have the information. What do you do to ensure that it's bulletproof? And by prosecuting the story, we mean questioning it closely, like a prosecutor would during a trial. Well, isn't it true? Where were you on the night of? What was the lighting like? How far away were they? What was he wearing? Could you tell me what you saw? Do you wear glasses? What did you hear? So forth and so on. Kind of Perry Mason style. Um, so you have the story in front of you. What are some of the things you should look for to bulletproof it? I will tell you dates. Double check dates. You can't believe how many times people get things, screwed up that might say, Thursday the 5th, and it turns out that the 5th was Friday. So did they mean Friday? Did they mean Thursday the 4th? Look at a calendar, double check dates. Math, anything to do with math. The reason why we got into journalism is because we suck at math, okay? I mean, let's just be honest. I can't balance a checkbook to save my life. Um, so, if you suffer from, math phobia, if numeracy is, you're not all that swift with numbers, find somebody who is. Google it. Figure out some way to double check your math. And this can relate to budgets, percentages, dollar amounts. I mean, I also can't tell you how many times we screw up millions and billions, millions with an M, B with a boy, or billions with a B as in boy. Which brings me to names, right? So, my last name is Mele, Mele, right? Uh, 4 little letters. You can't believe how it gets screwed up in the pronunciation, right? Meal, melee. What else did I get? I get it. I get it all. I've had maybe like 5 people in my life who ever nailed it on the first try. Anyway, so whenever I'm introducing myself and I'm leaving a message, I say, M is in Mary, E is in Edward, L is in Lincoln, E is in Edward. So be explicit when you are talking to somebody about how to spell their name. Read it back, use whatever kind of, alphabetic, signals you want to use. B is in boy, C is in Charlie, E is in echo, K is in kite, whatever you want to come up with. Or if you're in the street, hold up the spelling, say, hey, is this right? Is this the way? Do I have this correctly spelled? And I would spell in block letters because my signature, my script is terrible penmanship. So, spell it out in block letters, let them look at it, make sure that it's correct. If it's a complicated story, I am not averse to reading back quotes or double checking information. Now, we don't want to ever give somebody veto power or right of first refusal about an entire story. But if there's something that's like heavy duty math, heavy duty science, some complicated tax formulas, hey, could you take a look at this? Is this passage correct? Because you want to make sure that you've got it right and that you're not just assuming that, oh, I talked to this person once and I understand it. Because there's a lot of stuff out there that's very complicated. Directionals, east, west, south, north. You wouldn't believe like how many times we can get something screwed up on a map. We're looking at it and we're going, oh, that's west, and you're really looking east, or you're putting the wrong place, the wrong pin in the wrong place, and your direction is all screwed up. Dates of birth, birthdays, right? How old is he? Okay, well, you can say, well, he was born in 1969. But when in 1969, right? So you need to know precisely in order to figure out his age, because that will make a difference in, how old he is, or 1964, which means he's either 55 or 56, right? Depending on what, when. So double check that. Budgets, anything to do with numbers, math, money. So here's what I recommend. Print out your story and pencil check each and every critical fact. And by that I mean all the things I just talked about: dates, names, math, organizational names. Some organizations have got funny names. Oh, also verify URLs. If you're putting a link into a story, make sure it works properly. Phone numbers. Oh, here's a big one, right? I mean, how many newspapers have published phone numbers that they thought were going to the lottery hotline? And actually, we're a 1-800-porn hotline, and that is absolutely the God's honest truth. That has absolutely happened. You could look it up. It's not unheard of. It doesn't happen much nowadays, but it has happened. So pick up the phone and call it as it appears on your screen or on your phone. Call the number as it shows up there, so that way you can make sure you're not adding a digit or writing it or calling it as it appears in your notebook, but then you transcribe it wrong on your screen or in your story. So I just want to add one last thing here. This is an excerpt from a story in the Chicago Sun-Times, and it was headlined, "The Fast and the Frivolous, How the Media Bungled the Sandy Hook Shootings." And this is, he said, that part of the quote is, "Hell, the media have been wrong on big stories the media being wrong on big stories has been a regular occurrence since Dewey defeats Truman." And if you don't know what I'm talking about there, you can look up that headline. But anyway, the quote goes on, "But in a time when reports spread so fast, when information travels so quickly that it'll be seen by thousands within seconds, there is a new responsibility of self-policing these media outlets need to abide by, particularly when the subject calls for it. The limits are being tested, the line crossed and stomped on regardless of reputation, pushing these outlets down to the level of those so detested blogs, leaving readers in the cold, confused and less informed than they've ever been." So, again, take your time, review closely, pencil check, line edit, talk to others. Definitely have somebody look at what you're putting up, a second or third pair of eyes before you hit send, before you publish. Print it out, corroborate, be first, be right. Sorry, be right, then be first. And don't hit the gas pedal too quickly, because it's just, if you get your emotions and your adrenaline ahead of you, it's just a recipe for trouble. So anyway, again, if you need to reach me, I'm happy to take questions. It's Christopher.Mele, M as in Mary, E as in Edward, L as in Lincoln, E as in Edward, at nytimes.com. And I welcome your questions, or just you want to chat about the business, whatever. Hopefully this has been useful, and thanks for the opportunity to chat. Take care.